As everybody heard, this webinar is being recorded today, just so you're aware of that. Welcome to today's webinar, Tune Up Your Tree Farm Inspector Skills. Couple little housekeeping things, and then we'll turn it over to the presenters. My name is Robert Barton. I'm here with North Carolina State University, the Extension Forestry Program, and we'll be hosting in the background for today's webinar. I'll be turning over to our speakers here in a minute. Just a little bit different. If you've joined these webinars in the past, you probably participated where you weren't able to turn on your mic and things like that. In today's webinar, we're actually doing this as a Zoom meeting, allowing you to interact a bit more with the presenter. With that in mind, we ask that you keep in mind that we're going to ask you to keep your mics muted until we get to the question and answer period at the end of today's webinar. If you're going to enter anything into the chat, we ask that you limit it to the topic related to the discussion, just so we don't miss something if we need to follow up on something there. And if you do want to speak, we ask that you raise your hand and we will call on you to allow you to unmute your mic. If you don't feel comfortable using your mic and didn't want to ask questions that way, you can type them into the Q&A feature of Zoom. We'll also be monitoring that in order to take questions. And just a quick note, the North Carolina Tree Farm Program has 2 more webinars coming up, one on April 18th on domestic and global hardwood markets, and then one on May 16th on pond management. Both of these will take place at noon and are available on forestrywebinars.net. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters today. Today's presenters are Bryan Hulka and David Halley. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Bryan, to get started.
Great. Thank you, Bob, for that introduction. And I am Bryan Hulka. I live in New Bern, North Carolina. I've been working with the tree farm for quite some time as a tree farmer, a inspector, and member of the board. The reason why we're doing this program today, this training, is that inspections are not easy to do. And want to make sure people realize this is not inspector training. You should already be trained if you're on this webinar. This is going to be very specific to North Carolina and addressing some of the issues we've seen, especially Leslie and Jenny, as inspectors hand in the inspector form. Again, the reason why we're doing this is the form's not straightforward. You would think it would be, but it's not. There's some subjectivity there, and that's kind of what Dave and I want to address. And also the form is quite important. It's become even more important because we've gotten a recent interpretation from American Tree Farm that the inspection form can now be added to the management plan, and it will act as a de facto addendum. So it becomes a very important part of the documentation for the landowner when it comes time to when they do their external assessments. With that, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware. What we're going to be doing today is all this is on the North Carolina Tree Farm website, which is at nctreefarm.org. And Dave and I are going to be bouncing back and forth between the standards. So if you want to try this, you just go to Tree Farm Program, Certification, Inspectors, and then you scroll down and it shows Inspector Resources. Click on that. And these are the documents that we have put together as a North Carolina Tree Farm program to help the inspectors. What we're really going to be focusing in on today is this guidance for forest management plans and inspections forms. The reason why it's both the plans and the inspection forms is that the two are Siamese twins. I mean, there's a lot of reference to the management plan and the inspection forms, and they support each other quite a bit. Although we are going to focus on filling out the form, we inevitably will be talking a little bit about management plans. And hopefully in a few months, we'll have a subsequent webinar on writing a management plan, whether you're a landowner or a consultant or someone who is helping someone else write a management plan. The next document on here is conducting a tree farm inspection. This is a really good review if you haven't done a inspection in a while, or you get assigned an inspection from Jenny, and you're like, darn, I can't quite remember what I'm supposed to do now. Well, that goes through step by step, you know, in terms of getting the inspection form, calling the landowner, etc. So it gives you all the things to do until the very end when you get to submit the inspection form to Jenny. The inspection form itself, we do have a copy of the most recent one here that you can click on. I'm gonna highly suggest you don't print this off, and if you get assigned an inspection, because Jenny will send you an inspection form that already has a lot of the information pre-populated. And also these inspection forms, they get updated periodically. This one was most recently updated on December of 2023, so that's pretty recent. And then finally, the addendum is something that can be utilized, and we'll be referencing it a little bit as an addendum to the management plan if there's one or two elements that are missing, and you as the inspector feel like this tree farmer should go ahead and continue to be certified, we can utilize that. With that, let me just check my notes, make sure I didn't forget anything before I kick it over to Dave. And yep, Dave's going to go ahead and do the this first part, page 1 and 2. So when you click on that guidance, again, Dave's going to do this part, and then we'll go on from there. So Dave, I'm going to stop sharing and you take it.
Can you see that, what I see, standards of stain, page 1 and 2? Do you see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hey, my name is David Halley. I am an inspecting forester with the Tree Farm program. I am a consulting forester with True North Forest Management Services, but I've been with the Tree Farm program over 30 years, and the inspection form has always been challenging to me. I don't even think I got a perfect score until last year. So that tells you anything. It's not an easy process for the questions are very confusing sometimes. So what Brian and I are going to go through is go through this inspection form together and sort of answer the hard questions, or what does that question mean? How should you answer it? How should you complete it so that when Jenny gets it to review it, it's, you know, you'll get a passing grade and won't be sent back to you and waste more of your time. So what we've done is Brian and I have split up the portions of the inspection form, and we'll talk about each one and how to answer those questions, how to use your notes and observations. Let's talk about page 1 and 2 of the inspection form. Really, this is the main form. You record a lot of the data about the tree farmer himself. If it's a reinspection, the very top of the form will already be pre-filled out for you. So, you know, you'll have the state and the tree farm number already in that slot. If it's a new tree farm so you're certifying a new tree farm, you just leave that section of that top portion blank, because what will happen is that the North Carolina Tree Farm program will assign you a tree farm number after it's been approved. The same thing with the next question is, you know, this is only for initial inspections only. So if this is a new certification, this is what you'll fill out. You know, you're going to probably click on that certified recognition if it's a new tree farmer. And then couple questions about how the tree farmer learned about the tree farm program. It might have been you might have introduced it to them. And then that's in most cases probably, you know, other. But if this is a recertification, you leave that section blank. Now, if it's a recertification, this is where when Jenny sends you out a note, say, hey, one of your tree farmers due for reinspection, then this section you do fill out. You would click on the recertification renewal, and then you recommend you know, you either recommend it's going to be recertified or decertified. So you either check this box or this circle here. So if you do decertify it, you have to sort of tell the reasons why. And then in this section here, it tells you what, I mean, these are pretty obvious, you know, deceased, sold, missing, substandard. Maybe they just, you know, the management plan's not up to date or no interest. But you know, if you decertify, we'd want to know why. So you'd have to check one of these boxes on why. This is the field inspection data portion of the form on page 1. I talked to Jenny at length this morning, but you actually have to do a field inspection for the recertification. So you need to enter a date here, and then you do need to, if you meet with the landowner on that inspection date, then you just check field here. But this would, if you go by yourself, you put that date, and then if you talk to them either on the phone or via email, then you click that date right there. But if you meet together, then this date here and this date here will be the same. The date of the interview is tied to this date right here. All right, primary contact. If this is a recertification, all this information here will be populated, right? If there's some missing data, then I think you can add that in there. But for the most part, this section you'll leave alone. Now, what Jenny has told us is that, hey, if the primary owner information has changed, she would prefer that we do not cross out or write over this existing pre-populated data, because what happens is then all that historical data is lost. So what she recommends is to go to page 2 and under notes or observations, you type in their address and new contact information for the new owner. But you leave on a reinspection, you leave all this data the same. If there's a co-owner, then you could fill that information out. Now, if it's a new certification, you're nominating them for this information is pretty important that you fill all this out. Next portion of page 1, county, that's the county which the tree farm is located. Town is the closest town. Total acres, that's the total acres of the farm. That's fields, ponds, you know, home sites and everything. So that's the total acre of the farm. That's probably the total acreages of your tax parcel ID numbers. You total those up. Forested acres is strictly forested acres, but they also include ponds. They include, you know, wildlife food plots. The only thing that probably wouldn't be, you know, includes, you know, creeks, drainages, small ponds. The only thing you wouldn't include in forested acres would be cropland, large bodies of water. Location. This is a little confusing, always been to me. I think the best thing for everybody, if you could find out what the tax parcel ID is for that county, you'd have to go to the county website and find out. And this might be multiple parcel names. This would be a good place to put that. We just want to be able to locate the tree farm, and that's a good way to do it. Now, the Latin long, that's another important date. If you don't include that, you'll get kicked back. And remember, it's in decimal points. So, you know, it's going to be 79 point, you know, ... So same thing with latitude. We recommend that that data be probably the entry point to the tree farm. So if there's a driveway or something, that's where you should try to locate that lat long. All right, soil types. This always gets me every time. So really there's a primary and a secondary. A primary soil type would be any of the primary soils. You know, what is the most prevalent soil type on that property, all right? Sometimes if you do a soil maps, it'll tell you the percentage so the highest percentage soil type goes into primary. This next most prevalent soil type will go in this. And what we found out is that, you know, like if it says Wickham fine sandy loam, you check loam. So it's basically the last word of that soil description is you know, you would type loam. Same thing with the secondary. If it's Norfolk loamy sand, then you would click on sand. what we're also telling you is that the primary and the secondary could have the same soil type, or a similar soil type where you could actually check loam twice or clay twice. Next question is conservation activities. Is your tree farmer involved in any of these particular conservation activities? There's quite specific, it's in a conservation easement. There's threatened endangered species they're trying to protect. Maybe there's some restoration work that they're doing. Wildfire mitigation, a lot of landowners involved in that, even if, they maintain their roads or have fire breaks. Question here is, if no, would they be interested in that? That's based on a conversation you had with them. So in the notes, it's kind of, be nice to type in some activities that as they relate to these activities, especially if you check one of these boxes. Like there is a conservation easement on the property. The landowner does frequent prescribed burns, installs fire breaks to reduce wildfire risk. Property is enrolled in the Safe Harbor program, which is with the red-cockaded woodpecker. These are information that will help support these activities up here. The next question is the landowner involved in any cost share programs? And if so, is it the FDP program? Is it EQIP? Is it CREP? You could specify the programs here. And if not, are they interested? Does the property participate in a landscape management plan? For those of you from North Carolina, there is no landscape management plan in our state. So for anything done in North Carolina, you're always going to check that box no. Right? Landowner manage objectives. In most cases, if you have a forest management plan, it's spelled out in the management plan. So a lot of times in this box here, I just say, landowners, please refer to the forest management plan for landowner objectives. Management recommendations. Again, I think this is, hey, if there's a forest management plan, say, refer to the forest management plan for specific management recommendations. This can also be a little catch-all. Maybe there's an important recommendation that they need to do in the next 6 months. Then, hey, you need to sign up for cost share for this reforestation project would be priority one. This is kind of a catch-all. You can write whatever there, but in most cases, your management plan should cover these two boxes, and you can refer to that in the notes below those questions. And then here, the landowner signature. The landowner signature is not required for re-inspections, but it is required for certification. So then make sure that they sign it. A lot of times, if you check this box and you type in their name, that's the same thing, but make sure they understand that you're checking the box for them. This is where you put your name, you sign it. You can simply type your name, month, date, and year, and then what your recommendation is. Pioneer, we haven't really talked about it, but in North Carolina, we don't utilize that program. I would just say in most cases, don't check Pioneer. That's kind of a holding spot. In the 10 years we've been involved in this, we haven't done any Pioneer. Or you may recommend decertification. You are assigned a tree farm inspector number. If it's a re-inspection, that number will already be populated. If you know that number, then if it's a new certification, you can type it in there if you want. And then leave this blank, because this is where Jenny will review everything and make sure and then recommend whether it needs to be certified or not. All right, Brian, I think that's page 1 and 2.
All right, thanks. Before we go on to the rest of straight into the form, just wanted to give a little overview about the standards and a little history. Is that some of you folks can remember, 15 years ago now or more, Tree Farm was a recognition program, which meant you filled out the form, you checked their plan, and you said, yeah, you're doing a great job, and here's your sign. The AFF decided some time ago to make it into an actual certification program, which really ups the amount of work that needs to be done. And part of that is to be able to demonstrate that these tree farms that are in the program are being managed sustainably, And as part of being a certification program, in order to be a legitimate program, it needs to be approved or accepted by an international body called the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification. They're out of Geneva, and they're kind of like Underwriters Laboratory. If you get an electrical, like a toaster, and it says approved by UL Laboratories, that means it's been tested and it's probably in good shape. So likewise, the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, or PEFC, they have reviewed and approved about 48 different national standards, everywhere from Norway's standard to Brazil's standard. And because it's an international program, what you're going to see in the inspection form are going to be some things that won't quite make sense to us in the South and not in North Carolina. So for instance, the questions that Dave will be answering about afforestation or the emphasis on pesticides. These are more issues, and I'll bring them up as they come along, that aren't as impactful here locally, but they are important worldwide. And so that's why they're included in the tree farm program certification. Also, if you want to take a look at the standards themselves, it's also on the website. So just for instance, if you go to standard 2 and you click on it, this is the actual PDF from American Tree Farm Program. And it gives you the performance measure, or the standard itself, which is compliance with laws, a performance measure, and the indicator. And the way you can kind of think about this is the standard itself, this up here, that's kind of like the chapter heading. So we know in chapter 2, we're going to be talking about compliance with laws. And then the performance measure is kind of the subchapter. Okay, specifically, we're going to talk about compliance with state, county, federal laws. And then finally, the indicator, I always view that as the actual test question. That's what you as an inspector are being asked to try and find compliance with. And you can do that in many different ways. It can be your observations. Like, so instance, if they're talking about BMPs and are they in compliance, well, you can write in your notes that, yes, they had a harvest. I walked down to the stream. The buffers were intact. They're in compliance, in your professional opinion. Or it can be during your interview with the landowner. The landowner says, yeah, I've thought about threatened endangered species, and I've had the Fish and Wildlife Service come out and they've said nothing's here. So that's great. That can be used as evidence. And then finally, and what everyone likes, if you're an auditor, is something that's written. So for instance, if it's written in the plan, that makes it very easy for an auditor to say, yes, they covered threatened and endangered species. I see what resources they used, and then they can use that. A couple of other things about the standards that are going to be very important. 2 words that are real important to remember: should and shall. A should is a nice to have, meaning you'll see later on some of the standards are, you should consider aesthetics. Well, that would be, yeah, it's a great if you do it, and we'd really encourage you to take aesthetics into consideration. Then there are the shalls, and the shalls are very much, you need to find evidence of compliance, or else you really can't move forward with certifying that property. So again, shalls, you need to have evidence of it, and the shoulds are kind of nice to have. So with that, let's see if we can go back, and we'll let Dave go ahead and talk about standard 1. And so Dave, why don't you go ahead and take control, and I will sign off here.
Okay. All right, can you see guidance for standard 1 on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, the nice thing is Leslie has gotten this. When you go to this portion of our website, you can go down to every single guidance and click on it. So I'm going to basically, I've clicked on that. I'm here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on guidance for inspection form on management plans. This is, Brian and I agree. We wish this was not the very first thing that you do on this form, it's almost seems like it should be the last question you ask, because if your management plan does not comply with the standards, then really the property should not be certified. So we kind of wish you'd kind of go through all the other standards first, and this was the last question. But in this case, it's the very first thing that you have to go with. It's the very first standard. Today, we're really not going to talk about management plans, but we just need to make sure that in your management plan, it's your written documentation that you're covering the standards. So question number one is the plan should be active, adaptive, and embodies the landowner's current objectives. It's based on the current knowledge of the property. But yes, if any of these questions that go down here are checked no, then really this property is not ready for certification or recertification. And you have to either update your plan, or you have to make notes in this observation about that to help to understand the compliance of that particular thing. Or you do an addendum and attach it. All those can be supporting materials that help ensure that the property complies with the management plan. So, management plan has to describe the conditions at the time of, you have to have a current objective, management activities aimed at achieving those objectives, feasible strategies. You have to have an accurate map, There's a lot of folks that submit project plans, so it might be just something that the Forest Service gave them that, was about a reforestation project for 28 acres that they're going to spray and plant. That is not a management plan. It has to be a comprehensive management plan for the entire property. So don't get, a landowner submits that to you, you're going to basically say, well, look, you're not in compliance. You have to have a more detailed management plan in order to get enrolled in the program. There's a lot of tree farms out there that don't have really current forest management plans. So part of this process, when you go through re-inspection, is that you may have to recommend that an updated plan was developed. And they could either get it done by the Forest Service, North Carolina Forest Service. If you're a consultant or, an inspecting forester, maybe you can encourage them to update or create a new plan. Current is a little subjective. I don't think we put a time frame on it, but we normally would say, if the plan's greater than 10 years, in most cases, it might need to be updated, especially if there's been significant progress. But ultimately, the plan is compliant with the standards when it was written. So, if it's non-compliant, what the American Forest Foundation has told us is that if we make notes in the observations, or we attach an addendum to the plan and share that with the landowner, that plan can be brought up to standards without having to rewrite the plan. So yes, you need to say yes. If you click on right here, it'll tell you the things that need to be in the management plan, what need to be covered. And then, if there are a bunch of missing elements, click here. This is the addendum that if you could, if you were to populate all these blank areas on here, that could bring it up to standards without having to rewrite the plan. But let's be honest, folks, the tree farm program is designed for the cream of the crop. This is supposed to be the honor roll of tree farmers out there. So having a good forest management plan is a key to making this program successful, because if they get audited, this is the first thing the assessors are going to ask is, can I get a copy of their management plan? And they'll go through that, tooth and nail on, does it meet with the standards? Do they talk about landowner objectives? Is there a map on the property? Does this discuss soils? So this is a very important element. If you don't have a really good management plan, then this is the time for them to say, hey, we need to step back and we need to create a new management plan to comply with these standards. So for the most cases, if you're recertifying, all these questions have to be yes before you submit it. If you answer no to any of them, then it's not going to be enrolled in the program. And then, you tell them they either you help them create an addendum, you fill out more information on the inspection form. Here's some notes and observations you can put in there. So if they do comply, you can just say, hey, a detailed forest management plan was written in the property in 2023, and it was aligned with performance standards. Landowner objections are clearly identified in the forest management plan. Consulting form, monitors the property regularly. So even though this seems like something you ought to ask at the end of the inspection form, they get you right up front and make sure your management plan isn't compliant with the standard.
You good?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, that actually is the hardest one. That's why Dave did it. And also he does a lot more writing of management plans. And I think for new tree farms, we are now asking that you submit an electronic copy of the management plan. That way we can take a look, Jenny can take a look, Leslie, and sometimes Dave and I will take a look and confirm that everything is as complete as possible. So again, the management plan, incredibly important, and we will probably have training on it at a later date because it is so important. So I'm going to go on to standard number 2 and looking at the form. This is where we get to see the big word shall. So you need to be able to provide some evidence that you believe the landowner is complying with all relevant laws and regulations. So part of this to me is a converse. And again, in North Carolina, we have some forestry laws. Of course, there's the forest practices guidelines. And when the North Carolina Forest Service does an inspection on your property, that's what they're actually judging you against. Certainly for cost share, any type of those programs, you're going to have to be compliant with laws and regulations. Federal laws like threatened and endangered species we have, there are burning laws. But this is a much bigger task in other parts of the country where they have forest practices acts. California, Washington State, Oregon, even Virginia has harvest notification as a law. So for us, again, in North Carolina, this is, I hate to say, more of a conversation to have with the landowner, but certainly, ask them, okay, are you aware of any laws or regulations that you have to follow? And it's entirely possible that, that they say, well, I kind of leave that up to my consultant to take care of. And that's legitimate, hopefully it's a well-regarded consultant, and that's okay that you say landowner refers to or trusts his consultant is up on all laws and regulations. You can also ask the landowner if North Carolina Forest Service has ever visited their property. Again, if they've gotten cost share, there might be even for planting, they'll be out there during the planting, or they're supposed to. They're also supposed to do a check. They may have some documentation on whether or not they did a BMP compliance. Likewise, sometimes during harvesting. So there's also the need to show a commitment to being in compliance with laws and regulations. That's something you're going to want to write in the notes. I discussed with Mr. Smith the need to be in compliance with laws and regulations, and he understands and is very committed to it. If something's happened, that's not the end of the world. You just need to demonstrate or show that the landowner is going to try, corrected the situation to the satisfaction of the agency that was involved. Really, if it's a pattern, as it says here, a pattern of willful violations disqualifies a landowner from certification. Unlikely anyone that has been in the tree farm program or wants to be in the tree farm program is going to fall into having a pattern of willful violations. So with that, again, this one's a little bit more, I shouldn't say subjective, but it's a conversation. We don't have a lot of hard evidence. It's more of the absence of any type of issues. It's like, are you a good driver? Well, yeah, I'm a good driver. Well, when was your last speeding ticket? It's been 10 years, right? So, because you haven't had a speeding ticket in 10 years doesn't mean you don't speed. It just means you haven't been caught speeding. Not that we want our landowners to disobey the laws, but really, if there's anything showing that they've not been following the laws, that might be a red flag. Dave, you got anything to add to that? I don't know what you look for on compliance.
Well, one big thing is, maybe mention that in all your timber contracts, you specify that the contractors have to abide by local, state,
right,
county ordinances. Yeah, just cover.
That's a good point. Timber contracts and any other type of written agreement you get into different contractors, whether it's pesticides or otherwise. So thanks. With that, Dave, I'll let you do standard 3.
Okay. Okay, so standard 3 has to do with reforestation and afforestation. This is a pretty quick one. But I did get some recent information on that I didn't realize. I'm excited to kind of share that with you. But has the first question is, has the property been harvested or afforested since 2015 under this ownership? What Jenny's explained to me is harvesting has to be basically a clear cut. It has to be a final harvest. So if you've thinned the track since 2015, you actually have not done any clear cutting or final harvest, then you would check no. So if you've done pre-commercial thinning, commercial thinning, but no final harvest, then the answer to that question is no.
Dave, can you share your screen, please?
Oh, I thought I did. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So yes, this first question only applies to yes or no if it's a final harvest. So you can see down here, final harvest. If it's pre-commercial or commercial, then you check no, and then you skip to the very next question. But if there is a final harvest within that time period, since 2015, then you have to answer the rest of these questions. And then you just say, was it, adequately stocked within 5 years? Then, you check there. And then what you do is you provide information. You just say final harvest here. You type in, 14 acres, longleaf pine established in 2018. In the notes, you can provide some more information if you need to. Anything that helps explain that, yes, hey, we did a re-inspection of it 2 years after it was planted and the stocking level was adequate. Here's some examples of some language or comments you can put in the notes and observation. Again, landowners restored cutovers in 2016 harvest to loblolly pine within 2 years of the harvest. Landowner did some supplemental planting in 2008 to increase stocking levels. So any kind of notation in this box right here will help, explain what happened in this box here. Jenny says in some cases, forester will say, hey, we did a commercial thinning in 2019 on 28 acres. That's fine here, but it's still no and no, okay? Or if it's no here, you skip to the very next question. Brian, do you have any comments on this one?
Yeah, I'd just say the afforestation part, again, that's one of those international issues. So there are some parts of the world where people are afforesting, which means it didn't used to be in trees and now they're putting it into trees. So there's some concerns that's changing the ecological balance, perhaps like in Uruguay, some of the grasslands there. Honestly, in the South, everything was forested. So even if it's an ag field, we can get in a long debate whether or not that's afforestation or are you just putting it back in trees. So that's the only thing I would add there.
Okay, that's true.
You want me to go on with number
4? Yes.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Standard number 4. This is a shall. That you are in compliance with best management practices. And again, this is a little repetitive from above where we talked about compliance with laws. You're going to use probably a lot of the same evidence or same conversation. You don't have to regurgitate it all. But it is, best management practices are very important and are key way that we ensure that we're in compliance with the Clean Water Act. The second part about minimize road constructions and disturbance within riparian areas. Again, if there's no riparian areas that have been constructed in, that's fine, or no road crossings, things like that. Often a lot of the roads are already established, and so it may not be an issue. Wetlands, again, you can just say that, for instance, that areas are no-cut riparian buffer zones to protect and maintain water quality. That's where the BMP's compliance come in. If we go back, let's see if I can do this, to the performance measure on pesticides. This one has changed a little bit over the years. It's a little bit more, it is a shall. And I think the biggest change is making sure that you shall document the usage. So pesticides, again, in the South and in North Carolina, in forestry, it's a very effective tool. It's very cost effective. But they are asking that you at least have the conversation or write down how, let's say the landowner wanted to control woody vegetation. Burning is not an option because of the lack of capacity, or it's too close to smoke management is an issue. Likewise, mechanical might not be an option because of topography. So you just want to say that, you did consider a range of other ways to control the unwanted vegetation. Likewise, with pests, you can, if you plant seedlings, a lot of time you get them pounce treated, but you can also say, we did wait for 6 months to reduce the impact of the weevils on the stumps. If pesticides have been used on the property, now when I was going through this, it was interesting that, this is open-ended as to how long ago. I would think, and Dave, you chime in. Most of these are within the past 5 years. So, if you're inspecting something or putting something in for the first time and it was sprayed 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I'm not sure if that's quite relevant anymore, but certainly within the past 5 years, they're going to want to know, not only did you talk or consider alternatives, but then that those pesticides were approved by the EPA and stored and utilized in the correct manner. And when it says shall document, probably one of the best things to have, if it's a larger project, you're going to get an invoice from the company that did it. And on the invoice should, it's going to say what was sprayed, when was sprayed, what concentration. If you really want to be comprehensive, you can go and look up the labels themselves, and the labels will indicate whether, it's labeled for forestry use. Again, any contractor you utilize will probably have all that available, and they're wouldn't be in business if they were using things off label. Now, what if you do your own, which I've done on my own tree farm for some roadside spraying? Again, I just take notes that October 15th, I sprayed a tank mix of imazapyr and glyphosate. This is the concentration. Here are the labels, or the EPA labels. And it also helps me honestly go back a year or two later and say, what did I spray? Or, how effective was that? So that's what they're asking for there. Again, this is more of a international issue. And doing my homework for this, apparently glyphosate is actually banned for household use in France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. So not everyone has the same comfort level as we do with herbicides. And but again, being a international standard, they need to take that into consideration. Let's see what else we got. Prescribed fire. That's why I got this one. So likewise, if they use prescribed fire, you want to make sure that they understand, again, there it shows within the past 5 years. Then you want to make sure that they're in conformance with laws and regulations. The main thing there is, did they get a burn permit? That's the easiest thing to do. You can encourage them. You know, the North Carolina Forest Service has a certified burner class and training available. The landowner, some landowners, I've been working with landowners around here in New Bern that have joined a prescribed burn association. And the whole purpose of a prescribed burn association is to make sure everyone is doing it safely and in compliance with laws and helping each other out. So, but not everyone does burning, in which case it's pretty straightforward. You say no and you move on. Dave, you got anything to add to that standard?
Going back to the pesticides, you know, a lot of in North Carolina, we sent a tree farm notebook to all the new tree farmers and ones that re-inspected. And there's a section in there that Leslie has tabbed as pesticide use. So, and it's a blank form. So for personal use or even having a contract, we've kind of provided that form to help them keep track of their pesticide use. But yeah, I would say, like Brian said, if you get a pesticide use report from the contractor, you know, punch 3 holes in it and stick it in your tree farm notebook. So it's just more information that you don't have to find or look for when it comes time to a possible assessment.
Why don't you go ahead, David?
All right. Okay, so I've got standard 5, and again, this is pretty comprehensive. There's 4 different main things in this particular standard. One is what's threatened and endangered species. Here's the guidance for that. Forest management activities shall protect habitats and communities occupied, threatened, and endangered species as required by law. I mean, so that's kind of a yes question. I don't even know why they have it, but it's. And then, you know, you should confer with other natural resource agent, resource heritage programs, or qualified natural. Just make sure that you don't have any T&E species on your property. So you have to prove in this second question, what resources did you consult in order to find out if there's occurrences of threatened endangered species on your property? And this, you know, you could just write, you know, natural heritage program. You went to the pre-harvest planning tool that North Carolina Forest Service has, and they let you know, you know, how many T&E species were within 2 miles of your property. So you have to be able to provide. We usually recommend at least 2 resources that you looked at to identify. And if there's no known endangered species on the property, you just click no, and then you go to the next question. So what I have found is that sometimes I have T&E species within 2 miles of the property. Let's say it's a 50-acre farm. There's a creek that runs through it that runs into the deep creek, and there's a Cape Fear shiner that's a, you know, an endangered species in Deep Creek, but it's not on my property. I still may check no, but in the notes and observations, I'll say, hey, there's an endangered species in a creek that my property drains to. We're implementing BMPs to reduce the amount of sediment into the creek. But just so that you've made, you know, an observation that what are you doing on your property to specifically may help minimize the impact it may have on T&E species that are near your property. A lot of these species that you see on this list don't even apply to us. I'm hoping we don't have grizzly bears in North Carolina, but I mean, if there's there might be an endangered plant or insect or a salamander. You could click here and then you could specify more about, you know, spotted salamander in this box. And then what, you know, and if you do have it, you know, what measures are you undertaking to protect it, right? But yeah, threatened endangered species are tough. Sometimes you don't know they even exist, but in a lot of cases you can refer to the fact, well, you know, we're trying to protect riparian zones. If we run into any unusual plants, we try to protect them in reserve areas. But some of you may know, you may have an RCW on your property, and then you need to specify what particular activities you're undertaking to protect that species. Desired species, this is if the landowner has a very specific desire, and it's usually identifying his objectives about what species or forest community they're trying to improve, then we want to know, have that specified here. And then what you're doing, what activities you're conducting to help improve the habitat for the desired species or that community. I check this box a lot if I'm doing like white oak restoration work or longleaf pine restoration work. I'll click one of those, and then I'll talk here about what kind of activities are we doing to help improve that forest community. And that's also the same with the desired species. It doesn't have to be an endangered species. This person may be a turkey hunter and really would like to improve wild turkey habitat, and you would click here, other, and then down here you would mention that wild turkeys is a desired species of this landowner, and what we're doing to try to improve that habitat. If it's not, if they don't really have, if it's just a general, hey, forest community, forest health, then you just click no, and then you go to the next question. But if it's very specific, and I would say very specific, then I would click yes and then answer these questions here. Brian, you have any comment on that one?
Nope. I think you about got it.
All right, forest health. Landowners should make practical effort to promote forest health. I mean, this should be no on every single one. And again, it's almost the same question. Yes, yes, and then just what is the landowner to promote forest health? That might be commercial thinning, that might be prescribed burning, that might be invasive species control. You would click any of these that apply to what forest health issues are prevalent on the property. Are they concerned about storm damage, pest? In most cases, you'll check most of these boxes. Wildfire is always, a forest health issue. And then if it is fire, this is very specific to wildfire. What are they doing to mitigate wildfire risk? Are they thinning? Are they pruning? Are they doing prescribed burning? And then if they do any of that, then how many acres have they done? Again, I think those acres probably has to do within the last 5 years. Don't hold me to that, but something they did 20 years ago probably is not pertinent here. I mean, there could be bark beetle issues here that you've dealt with, but this, you really got to, use this notes and observations to really sort of talk about how you're dealing with forest health on that particular landowner's property. Does he makes annual inspections? In here case, they're working with the hunt club on training on me. In my cases, I'm working with hunt clubs to recognize what bark beetle is, so that if they do see it where they're hunting, they can notify the tree farmer about any unusual mortality that's occurring. They're putting in fire breaks to mitigate or reduce the threat of wildfires expanding on or near the property. So this can be, or you can just refer to your forest management plan for, hey, please refer to forest management plan that covers how we're improving forest health and working with non-native species eradication. And then the last one here, and this should be pretty quick, is there's a thing called forests of recognized importance, or FORES as we call it. But there's a definition of it later somewhere else, but these are significant forests that sort of require special recognition. In North Carolina, we made it easy on everybody. We just basically said that we only think national forests in North Carolina meet the large land scale criteria to be considered FORES. So, and all the national forests in North Carolina are owned by the federal government. So what we're basically saying is there's no FORES in North Carolina. And as long as you write this statement on there, that should cover the tree farm. So just say North Carolina Tree Farm Board of Directors, statement on FORES is where they get the support. And they, you know, that they've only determined the national forest in North Carolina meet this large scale criteria. So based on this guidance, this property is not in a 4E. So this should be pretty standard on every re-inspection or inspection in the state of North Carolina. But for those of you that are on the call that are outside of North Carolina, you may have designated areas that are 4As that could impact private land. Brian, any feedback on those?
Yeah, Dave, I'll just say about the 4E is that, you know, that's something that has perplexed many inspectors across the years. And that's in part why the North Carolina Tree Farm Board came out with that statement. And I do want to give a kudos to all the inspectors in the past few years, because one of our well dones in the past, I think it was last year that we had our last audit, was that everyone knew that in North Carolina, when I say everyone, all the inspections that were done stated that in North Carolina, all the 4Es are on federal land. So good job for hearing that and utilizing it.
And if you get a one of your tree farmers gets audited in the future, that's probably a conversation you need to have with them, because they're going to say, 4E, what is that? So, you know, you can coach them a little bit through it, especially if you're not going to be at the inspection when the auditors arrive. So explain to them what 4E is so that they'll be up to speed when the inspector comes, and was probably specifically asking that question, especially if it's not in the management plan.
All right, Dave, I'll go ahead and Dave gets all the hard ones. I get the easier ones. I think that's intentional. I will go ahead and do standards 6 and 7, which are fairly quick. Standard 6, notice this is a should, not a shall. And it has to do with aesthetics. Should manage the visual impacts. Again, not a huge issue for us in the South. People are used, but you know, our forest land are in rural areas, and in rural areas, people are used to final harvests. There's some things that you can, I've seen some people that, you know, they did a harvest near Pilot Mountain and they realized there was a lot of traffic going by, and they actually replanted the log deck in some really pretty flowers, and it made a nice effect. They do talk about according to the size and scale intensity of forest management. So if you are, for instance, the Biltmore Forest, which is a tree farm, they are highly sensitive to any aesthetic impacts from their harvest activities, and they take it into consideration with absolutely every harvest, because they have so many other uses going on out there, from hiking to mountain biking. They are very vigilant in their aesthetics activities. Whereas again, if you're in a rural, on the end of a dirt road, like one of my tree farms in Hyde County, not a lot of people going out there. Doesn't mean that you don't take it into consideration. You know, you might, as they say here, clean up a tire dump, or if you're putting in a road, put a little bend in it so people don't have a view down into the interior. That also cuts down on poaching. Or you might go ahead and revegetate any roads. So this is again a should, not a big issue for us in general. Trying to see if there's anything. Dave, you got anything else on aesthetics that you would suggest?
No, just, you know, if the landowner is interested in making sure that you have a pretty tree farm and they've done some things that are out of the ordinary, this is a good place to kind of document some of that, because you probably won't have that in the forest management plan.
Right. And it's surprising. A lot of tree farmers really do go through pains to make aesthetics important, because, you know, they're recreating out there and they want it to look nice as well. The next standard is special sites. And this is a shall, meaning you do need to show that you made reasonable efforts to locate specific special sites. Kind of like with threatened endangered species. This one, you are being asked, if you say there are special sites, what resources did you consult? And when you go back to the, I'll just use it as an example. When you go back and you look at guidance for forest management plans, this is where this comes in. Here are some places you can actually go to: National Register of Historic Places, State Preservation Office, Heritage Program. Also, one of the more interesting sources is Talk to Neighbors. One of my tree farms used to have a very productive and active moonshine business that I never realized was there. I mean, I knew what was there, but I didn't know what it was. So that's legitimate. That's a special site. Let's see what else. Let's go back to the standard. And on the inspection form, you're going to want to say what efforts you made to locate special sites. You may not have any, and that's okay. You know, you can say I talked to neighbors and checked the Natural Heritage website. Nothing really came up. But if you do have special sites, and this, again, you can have fun with this in terms of it is what is relevant to the landowner. It might be an old cabin, or and I think Leslie may have this, there's a willow oak that the grandfather proposed to the grandmother. It can be as simple as that. If it is really something truly that the landowner finds to be unique to them and they want to protect it. The main way when they talk about forest management, shall consider and maintain the special sites, 90% of the time, it just means that it's flagged during harvest or any other activities and that they're not disturbed. There's not if it's a cemetery, it's not saying that you have to maintain them, but, with the archaeological rules in North Carolina, you don't want to knowingly disturb a cemetery. Dave, you got anything else on that one?
No, I mean, there's also a cemetery database in some counties you can go and check.
Yep.
It's just
Yep.
see if it's if the cemetery is on their database. If not, that's another thing to recommend to tree farmers. Hey, you ought to call your local county cemetery advisory board and see if you can get it included on their
Yep.
database.
All right. You want to do the last one?
Yeah. Okay, this is the last standard 8. This has to do with forest products harvest and other activities. So forest products harvest, let me click on the guidance for the inspection forms. Landowners should use qualified natural resource professional qualified contractors when contracting for services. I mean, it's yes. Do they seek professional advice? Yes. Does they engage qualified contractors? All these should be yes. I mean, there shouldn't be any no's. Even if, even if they haven't done it in the past, then you check yes, because that's basically it's you're getting them to start thinking about using professionals and using qualified contractors when they do work. Ways to prove it, or, use your notes and your observations to really kind of hone down that, yeah, they are, they're using qualified spray contractors or certified burners. They've gotten their certified, burners contracts to make them more, qualified. They're using a consultant. In most cases, they are using a consultant. Make sure they, that hey, they mention that in the notes. Hey, we're currently, I've hired T&M to do our consulting work for us. Anytime, we have a timber sale contract, we require that, they meet certain standards. Ryan, any on that one?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that, you are being asked to, right there, 813, retain appropriate contracts.
Yes.
We've had discussion on what the appropriate contracts are. And really, if so much of forestry is done on a handshake. I had 4 acres planted by a local tree planter. I did not have a contract for that. It was done on a handshake and it was done. But if it's something larger, obviously like a timber sale or a spray job or anything like that, you really should just keep the contract in your records. It's nice to refer to for the next go round, and have it available, or ask your landowner to have it available or in their file should they be pulled as a site to be visited during assessment. And again, the tree farm notebook, I believe, has a pocket and area that you can keep different contracts and things like that in. So just as a reminder, and electronic works too. I've tried my best now to keep PDFs of everything so I don't have file cabinets, and that's fine as well. So that's what I got on that, Dave.
Okay. And Jenny even says, use the notes. Say, hey, if there's a timber sale contract, just type in here where that information can be found, so that, if an assessor gets there, then there's, a consultant has a copy of the timber sale contract, then they know they can go to the consultant and get a copy of it. This is monitoring. Landowner or designated representative, and that could be your consultant, shall monitor forest product harvests and other management activity to ensure they conform with their objectives. I mean, that should be a yes. And harvest utilization removal activities shall, this is not a should be conducted in compliance with landowner's objectives and to maintain the potential of the property to produce forest products and other benefits sustainably. Again, these should be 2 yeses. But anything you can do to justify that that's being done, hey, you've got a forestry consultant that monitors logging operations, or you make frequent visits that that when tree planting is going on, there's the North Carolina Forest Service is checking planting quality, or a consultant. Any notes in there is really going to help the assessor to understand that what you mean by you're monitoring the harvest. Yeah, this is another place where I usually type in the consulting forester maintains records of all forest product removals and how much has been removed. And so they can get copies of that from the consultant if they need to.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add here, Dave, is check your camera. You'd be surprised how many photographs you probably have of the landowner has of when they've been out recreating, and that all counts as monitoring. Or, everyone likes equipment running, and so often landowners will have pictures of the equipment. So that's great evidence if they happen to have some photos.
Yep. All right. I guess Brian, what I wanted to open it up now is Jenny. Jenny is the North Carolina Tree Farm Program's inspection kind of coordinator, and I asked her to say, hey, what are the 5 most common mistakes that she finds, or things that aren't taken care of on these inspection forms that she can share with all of us? Jenny, are you unmuted?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, all right, great. So I've got a couple of notes here that I made. The page 1, the question that you covered, Dave, about the field inspection and the landowner interview, including dates for both of those, and if the landowner participated in the field visit and that's where the interview occurred, putting the field visit date as the landowner interview date. For the questions that require a resource consulted, that would be the T&E species question, the FORI question, the special sites question, making sure that that resource that was consulted or whatever research was done is noted, is helpful and is one of the required questions. And then one of the last things I would say is that for a lot of the questions, the information that's required is dependent on the responses. And so when you're checking a form for completion, just going through, and if I answered this yes, then these follow-ups are required. If I answered it no, then I can skip to the next section. Paying attention to the additional information that's required that's dependent on your response. Some of the ones that are easily missed are the number of acres, for example, for wildlife mitigation activities, some of the dates for prescribed burning, some of those details that are a follow-up. And the last one would be the question on indicator 2.1.1 that has to do with compliance of laws. The way that question is worded can sometimes be interpreted as, if I answer this question yes, then the landowner has some non-compliance issues. But the intention of that question is to note a commitment to compliance, and that if you were to have an inadvertent violation, that you're committed to resolving it before certifying the property. So that would be my top 5 list.
Well, Bob, we're going to open it, up to questions of the audience at this point to try to answer any questions they may have. I'm going to probably just pull up the form. That way, we can move up and down if somebody has a specific question.
Dave, this is Leslie. I would like to give a little clarification on pioneer category that we have.
Okay.
In North Carolina, we do use the pioneer category, but we use it more as a step down than a step up. So in some states, a landowner who's interested in the program may come in as a pioneer, and once they meet the requirements for certification, they would move to certification status. But in North Carolina, we use it for landowners who have been certified in the past, but no longer meet the criteria for certification. Perhaps their management plan is insufficient, or there's something that needs to be corrected on the property. We will move them to a pioneer category for up to 6 months while they fix whatever non-compliance there was, and then we will recertify them once that's corrected. Technically, they are decertified, but we put them in a holding pattern so that they're still affiliated with the program. But if that correction has not been made within about a 6-month period, we will go ahead and remove them from the program. The other thing I just wanted to point out is, and it was probably obvious to you as we were going through the website, is what we have done is taken the inspection form and taken each of the sections and showing you what they look like. And then beneath those, we've shown these are the questions and here's our recommendation on how to answer it, and given you samples of comments that you could put into the notes or observations section. So just wanted to kind of say that out loud as to how that part of the website is set up. And that's all I have.
That's awesome.
So at this time, they're open for questions. The only question I see so far is from Gail Johnson, and she typed it into the chat. And it said, is there a display for this section? And it's been a while since that question was asked. So Gail, if you'd like to refine your question so they could follow up with that, or you can unmute yourself to ask the question, or if you want to retype it into the chat, that would be fine too.
Oh, that was when we didn't have a display. When
Oh, okay.
the screen wasn't shared.
Yeah, Leslie caught that. Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that it wasn't something else at the time.
Okay.
Does anybody have a question at this time? If you do, please raise your hand so we can call on you.
Now, I can't believe we did that good of a job. Dave might have, but I know I didn't.
No, I know I didn't.
I suspect it's one of these things where you start to have to go through a form and then a question comes to mind. And it's like, dang it, I wish I would have asked that one.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, actually, feel free to, contact Jenny, and often if she doesn't know right off the bat, she will contact myself or Dave and try and get, because this is honestly, every time I do an inspection, I'm going, okay, what am I supposed to do here? What's in it? And what are they really getting at here? So it's not intuitive, some of the questions, and it's easy to go down rabbit trails. So feel free to contact us, and if you have questions, we'll try and answer them, and we try and be consistent. That's another actual reason this has been an excellent exercise for us as a program, to make sure we were all literally on the same page on how we've been interpreting these things. And I'm sure over time, some of these may get adjusted, the interpretations may get adjusted, but that's the nature of the program.
Brian, this Jeremy Isom here. I'm not sure if you can hear me. My screen's not up, so I can't raise my hand.
Yeah.
Maybe a question for Jenny, or not even a question, just maybe if she could explain the payment process as it relates to re-inspections versus new inspections. Some of our inspectors get confused on how to advise our clients on routing of payment to Tree Farm.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hey.
So for re-inspections, when a property is due for re-inspection and recertification, we will send a notification out to the landowner and collect that payment from them before we reach out to schedule an inspection. And so the engagement with the landowner to collect the fee when a re-inspection is due is done prior to the inspection assignment. And when we reach out to ask for help with the re-inspection, we've already collected the payment. For new certifications, we receive the payment in a variety of ways. Sometimes we'll receive the application with the payment because that's been coordinated and collected before it gets to us. But if you have a new enrollment and you would like for us to invoice for it, we're happy to do that. The way they come to us is in a variety of ways. Sometimes the landowner contacts us, in which case we would go ahead and help with them about the fee, but sometimes the consultant's already done that when they refer them to us. So it can look a little bit different on new ones.
The other thing in North Carolina is that we've got a grant program that pays for $150 of the $350 enrollment fee. So it's only $200 for a re-inspection or a new certification. The only exemption of that is if a landowner has more than one tree farm, the second tree farm or third or fourth, they only pay an additional $100 to get that tree farm either re-inspected or certified.
And one other mention is that the conducting a tree farm inspection document that's now on our website has been updated to put the fee information in it. And so if you're looking for a reference that has that fee structure that Dave's mentioning, and also when it's collected in the process, you'll find it in that updated guidance document.
Hey, the other thing that people usually get a little confusion on is contiguous forest. Is that if you've got a tree farm, what makes it more than one tree farm? What has to happen? But I think guidance that we've given in North Carolina is if the tax parcel IDs lines connect or touch, then that tree farm is a contiguous tree farm. You don't have to create two tree farms. Like if a state road goes through the property, even though the property lines touch, that's considered a contiguous farm. Where it would have to be two separate tree farms is that if it's divided by a different land ownership, or let's say an interstate or a large highway, that would have to be like a divided highway. Most state roads, they're not wide enough to make you have to split a tree farm in half or into thirds. Did I get that right, Danny?
Yes, that sounds consistent.
So Dave, just so I understand from what I heard you say, if they had two different parcel ID numbers, they could still be counted as the same tree farm if it was like a local road cutting through the middle of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And as long as those lines touch, then it's considered a contiguous street.
All right. Other questions for Dave or Brian?
While we wait for some questions, I'll just, and Leslie or Jenny will probably correct me on this. Now that we've done this webinar and training, as an inspector, when you submit an inspection, and if Jenny doesn't have to make any corrections on it, you can be eligible for what's called the Golden Inspection Form, which is to encourage you to fill out the inspection form correctly. And Leslie, you want to tell us what the prize is for that?
I'm trying to remember what we changed it to this year. I think it's a $50 gift card when you get an inspection form without any errors on it.
Which is not easy to do.
It is not. It is not. Yeah, I think Dave said he's been doing them for 35 years and he got his first one last year.
Right.
It's hard to do, but we're happy to talk you through it as well.
There's also an incentive to sign up new tree farms. I think there's a $25 gift certificate if you sign up a new tree farm each year. The other thing that you inspectors may not know about is that we have a scholarship, tree farm scholarship. It's for tree farmers, but last year we added tree farm inspectors. So if you have a sibling or a grandson, does it maybe explain who qualifies? But yeah, if they're getting ready to go to college and they need some scholarship, there's a scholarship form you can fill out. I think you have to write an essay, I believe, but how many scholarships have we given out in the last year?
So we offer a scholarship each year, $500 scholarship, and it can be for an inspector's child or grandchild who is enrolling in an accredited school for continuing education, and all the criteria is spelled out on our website as to what you have to do. But there is a brief essay. Last year's the first year we did that, but any of you who are also tree farmers, we have a scholarship for tree farm children and grandchildren as well. And we typically give 3 to 4 of those each year. We'll be sending out information about applying for that in the next few weeks.
And it doesn't have to be, they don't have to be enrolling in forestry. They could be any major that they so choose.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. Glad to see we had 36 participants. That's great. Hopefully this was educational. I know Leslie and Jenny have spent a lot of time working on this, and I appreciate the work they've done in terms of putting it actually on the website and getting all the links to work. It's quite tedious, and Jenny is she's our filter, if you will, or she's the controller when it comes to inspection forms. So hopefully this training will help her make her job a little bit easier. Dave, you got anything else to add?
No, yes, it's been a lot of work getting this up. These guidance are available to you, and hopefully maybe even a recording of this webinar will be added to the website at some point too.
And in reference to the recording, it will be available through the same link in which they joined today's session, so they will be able to get back to it here in a few days. I just want to remind everybody again of the upcoming webinars that the North Carolina Tree Farm Program is sponsoring. The next one is April 18th, Domestic and Global Hardwood Market Updates. That is on forestrywebinars.net already, so you can go there and register. And the May 16th webinar coming up on pond management, also available on forestrywebinars.net. And we want to, if you need to reach out to the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, you can reach out to them through their email or phone number. And of course, all the references and resources that are available on their website. And with that, unless Dave or Brian or Leslie have something, I think we can bring this to an end.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.